Starting with the American dream, John was just another hopeful immigrant among millions who crossed the Atlantic, chasing the elusive dream of a brighter tomorrow. With nothing more than a battered suitcase in one hand, and his wife Emily's delicate fingers clutched tightly in the other, he arrived in New York City on a damp summer morning. The year was 1992, and the city was buzzing with the frenetic energy of possibility. The towering skyscrapers, the relentless rumble of subway cars, and the honking symphony of yellow cabs painted a chaotic, yet oddly comforting picture of a place where anything could happen. "This is it, Emily," John said as he took his first steps out of the terminal at JFK. "This is where we build it. Our future. Our family. We're gonna make it here, I promise you." Emily, clutching their modest savings hidden inside a white envelope wedged at the bottom of her purse, smiled softly, but anxiously. They stood silently for a moment, staring at the concrete jungle that loomed before them. This wasn't like the rural town John grew up in back in Poland, where fields stretched endlessly, and life followed the quiet rhythm of the seasons. No, this was America. Unapologetically fast, fiercely competitive, and overflowing with opportunity just waiting to be seized. Or so they believed. John had always been a man of grit and determination. As a young boy, he'd watched his father stitch boots from sunrise to dusk in their modest family home. "Hard work is the only honest thing in this world, son," his father used to say. Those words planted deep roots in John's soul. And now, in the land of skyscrapers and concrete, he was ready to put them into practice. The first few years were anything but easy. Okay, one more shift," John muttered to himself as he braced for another long night scrubbing dishes at a hectic diner on the Lower East Side. By day, he worked as a laborer at construction sites scattered across Manhattan, lifting bricks, mixing mortar, and grabbing coffee orders for foremen who barely noticed him. His back ached constantly, his hands were raw and calloused, and his English was halting at best. But John never wavered. Every dollar meant something, a brick in the foundation of the life he'd promised Emily. And every evening, though bone-tired, he returned to the tiny apartment they rented in Queens. Emily, who had taken a job as a seamstress, would greet him with a hot meal and a determination as fierce as his. They would sit together at their rickety dining table, squinting at employment ads in the newspaper, circling any line that promised to pay just a bit more. Life got better gradually. By 1995, they managed to save enough for John to take evening courses in construction management at a community college. "Emily, this is the first step," he'd tell her over and over, his voice brimming with excitement. "I won't be laying bricks forever. One day, I'll be running the site." Things began to change when John landed his first steady job as an assistant to a Polish contractor who specialized in building suburban homes. Though the work was brutal, the pay was consistent, and for once John could send a few dollars back home to his aging parents while still saving for his own dream, opening his own business one day. By 2002, the dream began to take shape. With a modest loan and a reputation for being the hardest worker on the block, John founded his own construction company, Skyline Builders. The logo was simple, a silhouette of a New York skyline etched over a rising sun. It might have been small at first, handling minor renovations and fixer-uppers, but John treated every job like it was a skyscraper commissioned by the mayor himself. "I tell you, Emily," John said one evening as they sipped coffee in the backyard of their modest home in New Jersey, a home they'd bought just 2 years earlier, "one day, you'll see my name on the side of trucks all over this city." Emily smiled, confident in her husband's spirit, and she had every reason to be. Contracts started rolling in, then referrals. His crew expanded from 2 men to 10, then 20. By the time their son Ethan was born in 2005, John's company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Every new paycheck, every successful project completed, felt like the tangible weight of John's original promise to Emily and their newborn son. Their little family had made it. John even began dressing the part of a successful businessman, pressed suits, leather shoes, and a silver watch Emily had gifted him on their 10th wedding anniversary. They were the quintessential American success story, immigrants who came with nothing and built a life from the ground up. A painful fall. For a while, everything seemed perfect. John's company was taking on bigger clients, Emily was happier than she had been in years, and little Ethan had a backyard to play in, something many kids in the cramped apartments of New York City could only dream of. But life, as John would soon learn, has a way of pulling the rug out from underneath you when you least expect it. The financial crash of 2008 hit like a tidal wave, sparing no one in its path. John's construction business, once solid as granite, began to crack. Contracts dried up, longtime clients, many of whom had trusted him for years, halted projects or disappeared entirely. Loans that funded equipment and expansion still needed to be repaid, but with no income, the debt piled up like bricks in a wall. At first, John tried to hold it all together. "We've weathered storms before, Emily," he said one night, pacing the kitchen floor of their modest New Jersey home. "This'll pass. This country, it bounces back. We just gotta hold on a little longer." Emily, stirring a pot of stew with a worried expression, nodded and tried to stay positive. "I believe in you, John. You always find a way." But deep down, John wasn't so sure. The bills stacked higher than his hope. Weeks passed, then months, and John's optimism turned to desperation. "I had to lay off 4 more guys today," he confessed to Emily one evening, his face hollow and hands trembling as he held a steaming cup of coffee. "Good men, family men, men who—" His voice broke and he set the cup down before his tears spilled into it. "I promised them work, I promised them stability, and now I'm cutting them loose with nothing." Emily placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not your fault," she murmured. "You're doing everything you can." "Is it enough, though?" John shot back, his voice rising. "We're behind on the mortgage, Ethan's tuition, the trucks, the equipment. Emily, I'm drowning, and I'm pulling you and Ethan down with me." "Don't say that!" Her voice cracked, tears glazing her eyes. "We're in this together, we always have been." But even togetherness couldn't outrun the storm. By the end of 2009, Skyline Builders was no more. It ended quietly. No dramatic boardroom confrontation or press headline. Just a stack of official papers from the bank, and a notice on the office door that read, "Foreclosure in process." The same trucks that once proudly displayed the Skyline Builders logo were repossessed. The tools, the workers, the dream, all gone. John avoided the mirrors in his home during those days. The reflection that stared back at him was not a businessman, but a broken man. Weary eyes, shoulders slumped under the weight of failure, and a heart heavy with guilt. The final bruise came when they lost their home. A late-night knock at the door delivered the eviction notice, like a blow to the gut. "We've given you enough extensions, Mr. Kowalski," the landlord said softly but firmly. "I'm sorry, but you need to vacate." Packing up 15 years of memories into cardboard boxes was like tearing apart pieces of his soul. Emily held up their wedding photo, her fingers trembling. "Do you think we went wrong somewhere?" she asked. "No," John replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "We did everything we were supposed to. It's just, this system isn't built for people like us. When it breaks, we break too." They moved into a cramped, dingy apartment on the outskirts of Jersey City, a place barely bigger than their garage once was. The ceiling leaked, the walls were paper thin, and the distant hum of trains passing through echoed day and night. Emily, already battling her worsening health, did her best to stay upbeat, but John could see it, plain as day. She was fading. Early mornings often saw her hunched over the kitchen sink, clutching her chest or struggling to catch her breath. The medical tests they couldn't afford finally revealed what John dreaded: late-stage cancer. Treatable, perhaps if they'd caught it sooner, but with no insurance and their savings long exhausted, options were limited. "Don't spend on me," Emily whispered one night, her voice barely audible beneath the whir of a broken ceiling fan. "Save it for Ethan. His future is all that matters now." "Stop it!" John grabbed her hand. "You're my future too, you always have been." But there was no fighting this battle. Just like the business, Emily slipped through his fingers little by little. By the summer of 2012 she was gone. If losing the company had felt like a storm, losing Emily was an earthquake. The foundation of John's life crumbled entirely. He stopped shaving, he lost weight. Days lost their meaning, blurring into nights as he sat in the dark, staring at the faint outline of Emily's photograph on the mantel. "Daddy?" Ethan's voice broke the silence one evening. The boy had grown quieter since the move, retreating into books and his room, his once bright personality dimmed by the weight of the family's struggles. "What is it, kiddo?" John asked, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Do you think Mom can see us?" Ethan looked up, his young face etched with lines of worry no child should bear. John hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, bud, I think she can. And if she can see us, she'd want us to move forward." Little did Ethan know how close John was to giving up entirely. The man who once walked into America brimming with dreams now couldn't summon enough hope to make it to the next morning. But it was Ethan, his son, who still clung to the ashes of those dreams, who ultimately pulled him back from the brink. One night, surrounded by unpaid bills and burning with the pain of knowing Emily was gone, John stared at Ethan as the boy struggled with a history assignment at the tiny makeshift desk in their living room. "History," the boy muttered, shaking his head. "Why does it even matter?" "Because it shows us we always have a chance to make things right," John said, nearly startling himself with the firmness of his answer. "And we're not done making things right. Not you, not me, sacrificing for his son." It wasn't long after Emily passed that John made a solemn vow to himself. Ethan's life would never be defined by struggle and loss the way his was. If it kills me, he thought, I'm going to give that boy a chance. He's going to live the dream his mother and I once believed in. It was the kind of promise that would push a man to his breaking point, and beyond. "Dad, you don't have to do this," Ethan murmured, sitting at the beaten-down kitchen table of their cramped one-bedroom apartment. The place smelled faintly of mildew, and the wallpaper peeled in the corners, but it was home. For now. John bent over his work boots, the leather scuffed and worn thin, tying the laces with hands that shook slightly from exhaustion. "Yes, I do," John said, his voice firm but kind. He glanced up at Ethan, his tired blue eyes softening as they met his son's. "I have to. But Dad—" "No buts, kiddo," John interrupted gently but with finality. "We've got tuition payments coming up. You really think I can let something like sleep get in the way of that?" Ethan looked down at his hands, fiddling with a loose thread on his hoodie. He was 17 now, tall and lean, with his mom's dark hair and John's determined jawline. College applications were consuming his life, and while he didn't say it outright, Ethan was worried. He knew money was tight, tighter than any parent would admit to their child. "Tuition's one thing," Ethan muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you're killing yourself, Dad. You're working 3 jobs now." John let out a weary chuckle, though even that sounded strained. "Not 3 jobs," he corrected. 2 jobs and one, entrepreneurial opportunity. "The night shifts at McDonald's are not an entrepreneurial opportunity, Dad." "Hey," John shot back, pointing a grease-streaked finger his way. "I take pride in my Big Mac assembly skills, thank you very much. Fastest flipper this side of the Hudson, they call me." Ethan couldn't help but smirk, but the worry in his eyes didn't fade. The smirk disappeared entirely when he saw John slip a small brown envelope into his jacket pocket. "Is that—" Ethan began, his voice laced with concern. "It's nothing," John said quickly, already standing and grabbing his keys before Ethan could get another word in. "Just something I have to do, all right? You focus on your homework." But Ethan wasn't naive. He'd seen those envelopes before. They were rent receipts, loan payment notes, or IOUs waiting to tear a little more hope from his father's weary shoulders. "Dad!" Ethan called as John opened the door, pausing in the doorway. John turned back, forcing a smile. "What is it, bud?" "You don't have to—" "I know what you're gonna say, Ethan," John interrupted, leaning against the doorframe, his voice softened. "But let me tell you something. One of the first things your mom and I learned when we stepped off that plane in New York was that nothing in this life is handed to you. You want something? You work for it, you work hard, and if you're lucky, real lucky, someone's in your corner, putting in double the work to make sure you get where you're going." Ethan blinked, his throat tightening. "You're my kid," John continued. "My job is to be in your corner. It's not easy, yeah, but you?" John pointed at him. "You're worth it. Every late shift, every blister on these hands." He held them up, showing off the raw, calloused palms. "All of it. I'm not some big-shot company man anymore, but that doesn't mean I've run out of ways to provide for us." Ethan stood, crossing the room to face his father. "I didn't ask for this, Dad. I mean, I appreciate it, I do, but if you need to quit a job or—" "No," John cut him off, his eyes narrowing. "You don't get it. You think this is just about making enough to pay the bills? Ethan, this is about you. I need you to understand what it takes to build a life. What it takes to give something your all. You don't get to quit on dreams, especially when they're just within reach. You've worked for this, Ethan. You deserve to go to a great college, to have doors open for you that were always closed for people like me. And if I have to break my back for that to happen, you better believe I'm gonna do it." John sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I failed once already," he admitted, his voice dropping lower. "With the business. With—" His words hung in the heavy silence, but neither needed him to finish the sentence. Emily's absence filled the room like a shadow they could never escape. "So if I can't give you and your mom the things I promised, the least I can do is give you the future I promised." Ethan swallowed hard, wanting to say something, anything, but the lump in his throat wouldn't allow it, so he simply nodded. John stood there for a moment studying his son's face as if committing every feature to memory. Ethan hated seeing him like this. Worn down but still stubbornly standing tall. "Go get some sleep," Ethan finally managed to croak out, his voice shaky. "We'll figure this out together." John smiled, but there was an edge of sadness behind it. "That's how you know you're a good kid," he said. "Always looking out for your old man, but it's not supposed to be that way, not yet." He patted Ethan's shoulder before turning to leave. And just like that, he was gone again, off into the night to juggle his jobs, his debts, and his undying devotion to Ethan's future. The next few years were a blur of sweat-soaked work shirts, microwaved meals at midnight, and long hours under flickering fluorescent lights for John. Whether it was cleaning office buildings in Manhattan or hauling furniture for a moving company, no job was too small or too hard. Every extra dollar went into Ethan's college fund. Meanwhile, Ethan worked part-time shifts at the local library, insisting he wanted to contribute something, even if it barely scratched the surface of tuition expenses. "Dad, maybe I shouldn't go to one of those big schools," Ethan said one night as they ate dinner, boxed macaroni and cheese with a side of canned green beans. "I could go to the local community college, save us a ton of money." John looked up sharply from his plate. "Absolutely not." "But, no, Ethan, you've worked your tail off to get good grades. You've earned this chance. You think I'm slogging it out day and night just for you to settle?" John shook his head. "No way, you're going Ivy League if that's where you want to go." And while Ethan didn't end up in the Ivy League, he did make it into a prestigious private university in New York. The day the acceptance letter arrived, John held it like it was made of gold. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, grinning ear to ear. "That's my kid. That's my kid." Ethan laughed, feeling embarrassed but proud. "It's just a college, Dad. It's not like I cured cancer." "Not yet, you haven't," John teased, "but give it time." In truth, John knew the journey ahead wouldn't get any easier. The expenses were greater than ever and the cracks in his health and resilience were beginning to show. But watching Ethan pack his bags for college, John felt lighter than he had in years. As the sun set on another long workday that night, John stood on the apartment's tiny fire escape, looking out at the distant city skyline. "I told you, Em," he whispered, his voice trembling but steady. "Our boy's gonna make it, no matter what it takes." Ethan's pinnacle of success. It wasn't long after Ethan graduated college that his star began to rise, just as John had always hoped, prayed, and worked for. The boy who once leaned over a dimly lit desk in their cramped apartment, worrying over essays and math problems, was now soaring into a world of sleek offices, corporate boardrooms, and high-stakes decisions. For John, Ethan's success was more than just his own dream fulfilled. It was the culmination of every hour he had spent laboring in silence, every sacrifice he had made without hesitation. "Dad, you're not gonna believe this," Ethan said, his voice practically vibrating with excitement over the phone one late afternoon. "I got the job! Marketing position at Ridge & Company." John paused, the damp rag he was using to wipe down a set of kitchen counters at his cleaning job hanging in his hand. He could hear his son's happiness through the receiver, sharp and clear, and it made his heart ache with equal parts pride and exhaustion. That's fantastic news, Ethan," John finally managed, his voice a bit hoarse from shouting over the sound of vacuums all day. "Ridge & Company, huh? Big firm, real fancy. I knew you had it in you, son." "I wouldn't have gotten this far without you, Dad." Ethan's voice softened a little, and John could almost see the boy's lopsided smile as he said it. "Seriously, do you realize how much this means to us?" "To you, kiddo," John corrected, a smile creeping across his face despite himself. "You're the one doing all the big stuff now, Ethan. I'm just the guy cheering from the sidelines." Ethan laughed. "Nah, you're the coach, Dad. Always have been," John chuckled, shaking his head. Coaches didn't scrub floors or serve Big Macs to keep their kids in the game. But to Ethan, none of that seemed to matter. Ridge & Company was only the beginning. Within a year, Ethan had been promoted twice. He moved to a sleek, high-rise apartment in Manhattan, a far cry from the small New Jersey flat he'd grown up in. The city skyline, which John had once admired with Emily from afar, now surrounded Ethan every day. He navigated it with the ease of a man born to succeed. "Dad, the craziest thing happened at work today," Ethan said one evening during a rushed phone call. His tone was confident, like he'd finally stepped into shoes that fit him. "The COO singled me out in a meeting. He was like, 'Ethan, you have an eye for this stuff. You ever thought about managing your own team?'" Can you believe that? Me, managing a team? Like, a year ago, I was just an intern. John smiled as he balanced the phone between his ear and shoulder. He had just sat down with a reheated plate of leftovers after his second shift. I can believe it, he said. Hell, anyone who meets you for 5 minutes would know you're meant for big things. You really think so? Course I do, John replied matter-of-factly. You've got that spark, Ethan, always have. And now you've got the chance to light up the whole damn building. By Ethan's 3rd year at Ridge & Company, his life seemed almost too good to be true. He was one of the youngest senior managers in the firm's history. His suits were tailored, his coffee orders memorized by the barista at the corner Starbucks, and his client portfolio looked like the who's who of New York City's elite. John, meanwhile, watched it all unfold with quiet pride. Every visit to Ethan's corner office felt surreal. The first time John had stepped off the elevator, squinting at the glossy marble floors and towering glass panels surrounding him. Pretty swanky, huh? Ethan had said with a grin, greeting John in the office's sleek conference room. John nodded, still a little overwhelmed. I'm not so sure I should have worn this old jacket here, he joked, glancing down at his worn-out corduroy coat. Don't be silly, Dad. You could walk in here in a mechanic's jumpsuit and I'd still show you off like you're my hero. John laughed, but the words stayed with him, sweet, genuine, a reminder of the boy Ethan had always been, even if he was now surrounded by walls of polished glass and co-workers who spoke in jargon John didn't understand. One weekend, Ethan brought someone home for John to meet, a bright, confident young woman named Amanda who worked in public relations. She's the real deal, Dad, Ethan said, beaming as Amanda stepped into their tiny apartment in New Jersey. She fit in awkwardly among the mismatched thrift store furniture, but John couldn't miss the way she looked at Ethan, as though she saw the same spark John had always seen. So, John said, biting into an early dinner of sandwiches Ethan had brought along. You guys serious, or is this just one of those, what's the word, flings? Ethan coughed, nearly choking on his drink. Jesus, Dad, way to put me on the spot, Amanda laughed. It's okay, I like him, he's direct. See, she gets it, John said with a grin. You'd better hang on to this one. By year 5 of Ethan's career, weddings were followed by promotions, and promotions were followed by even bigger accomplishments. Amanda fit seamlessly into Ethan's new world of dinner parties, gala events, and exclusive networking circles, and John was always the first person Ethan called when something big happened. I'm proud of you, son, John would say like clockwork. I know you are, Dad, Ethan would reply, and I'm proud of you too. But as Ethan's world expanded, with job titles growing loftier and responsibilities stacking higher, John sometimes felt like he was standing on the outskirts, watching from behind a pane of glass. The late-night calls became less frequent. Weekend visits turned into brief coffee meetups. Ethan loved his father, but the weight of his new life shifted priorities in subtle, unavoidable ways. Still, John wouldn't trade anything for Ethan's success. Every time he saw his son in a sharp suit stepping out of a shiny black car, shaking hands with people John would never meet, he saw Emily smile in Ethan's confidence. The dream they had built for him wasn't just alive, it was flourishing. Late at night after finishing yet another shift, John would sip his coffee and stare out at the city lights. You did it, kid, he whispered into the dark. You went and made it. Your mom would be so proud. The growing distance. John had always known that success could change people. It wasn't something he feared, no, he welcomed it. He wanted Ethan to rise higher than he ever could, to taste the sweet fruits of opportunity and leave behind the shadows of struggle. But what he hadn't anticipated was the way that success would quietly, insidiously, build a wall between them. You barely call these days, kiddo, John said one evening, phone pressed to his ear as he balanced a crate of groceries on his other hand. Your old man's getting pretty good at voicemail greetings. Come on, Dad, it's not like that, Ethan replied, his voice hurried. John could hear the faint sound of office chatter in the background, phones ringing, keyboards clattering. Things have been crazy at work, a big project's going through and they've got me running point on it. It's like every minute's accounted for. John shifted the phone to his other ear and let out a soft laugh. Yeah, I get that. Corporate life keeps you moving. Just don't forget who you're running for. That's not fair, Ethan sighed, the stress in his tone unmistakable. I'm doing all this for us, for the life we've talked about since I was a kid. Don't make me feel guilty, Dad. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, John said gently. He paused outside his apartment, balancing the groceries against the chipped door frame. I'm just saying, don't forget to make time for the little things. Yeah, Ethan replied, though his voice had grown distant, distracted. Listen, Dad, I gotta go. Amanda's waiting for me at this dinner thing and I'm running late. We'll catch up soon, okay? Love you. Before John could utter another word, the line had gone quiet. Love you too, son, he muttered under his breath, opening the door. The soon Ethan had promised stretched into weeks, then months. John would often sit by the phone in the evenings, dialing Ethan's number only to stare at it before setting it back down. He wasn't mad, he understood the demands of his son's new life. But God, did the silence sometimes feel suffocating. When Ethan did call, it was usually rushed. A quick 5 minutes between meetings or on his way to an event. "Sorry it's been so long, Dad," Ethan would say, his voice filled with a vague sense of guilt. "Things have just been, crazy." "Crazy's good," John would respond with a chuckle, forcing enthusiasm into his voice. "It means you're doing something right." And then, almost like clockwork, Ethan would say, "Listen, Amanda and I want to have you over soon. We'll set it up, I promise." But the invitation never came. By the time Ethan and Amanda finally did invite him over, John felt more like a guest than a father. Their Manhattan apartment was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture that looked untouched, and a view of the skyline that could take anyone's breath away. "Dad, you made it," Ethan said, greeting him at the door with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Wouldn't miss it, kid," John replied, stepping inside and glancing around. "This place, wow, it's like something out of one of those design magazines." Amanda appeared moments later, impeccable in a sleek black dress. "John, glad you could join us," she said, her tone friendly but distant, like she was speaking to an acquaintance rather than the man who had raised her husband. "It's a beautiful place you've got here," he said, trying to bridge the gap. "You think so?" Amanda smiled politely. "It's just a rental, of course. Ethan and I are looking into buying something uptown, something more permanent." The three of them sat down to dinner at a polished mahogany table. Everything about the evening felt curated. Amanda's perfectly plated food, the subdued jazz music playing in the background, the casual but calculated way the conversation steered clear of anything too intimate or messy. "So, how's the cleaning job?" Ethan asked, cutting into his steak. John hesitated. It wasn't the question itself that stung, but the way it sounded coming from Ethan's polished, professional voice. Same old," he replied, forcing a smile. "Just keeping busy." Amanda sipped her wine, her eyes flitting over to Ethan before she spoke. "You know, John, I've been thinking, it might be a good idea to set up some kind of fund for you." "A fund?" John asked, blinking in confusion. "Yeah," Ethan chimed in, his tone overly cheerful. "We've been talking about it. Something to help out, so you don't have to work so much. With everything you've done for me, Dad, it's the least we can do." John felt the words like a punch to the gut. He stared at his son, struggling to reconcile the boy he had raised with the man sitting across from him now. "That's kind of you," he said slowly, his voice tight, "but I don't need charity. Never have, never will." "Dad, it's not charity," Ethan insisted, his fork clinking against his plate. It's just us giving back. To thank you. To thank me." John repeated the words, a bitter taste rising in his throat. He looked at Amanda, who was watching him with a measured expression, and then back at Ethan. For the first time in years he felt like an outsider in his own family. When John left that night, the weight of the visit hung heavy on him. He walked the city streets for hours, the distant hum of traffic and the glittering lights of skyscrapers doing little to lift his spirits. Somewhere along the way, amidst all the success and the shiny new life, he and Ethan had stopped speaking the same language. Weeks later, when Ethan's calls came less and less frequently, John wasn't surprised. Amanda had made it clear that they had a reputation to maintain, and John, with his work boots, his rough hands, and his simple way of life, didn't quite fit the picture. "I'm proud of him," John muttered to himself one evening, sitting alone on his apartment's fire escape. He stared at the distant city skyline, the same one Ethan now called home. "I'm proud of who he's become. I just wish I didn't have to watch it all from so far away." The harsh truth settled over him like a cold wind. Success had given Ethan everything John had ever dreamed for him: freedom, comfort, respect. But it had also taken something away, something John wasn't sure they'd ever get back. For the first time in his life, John felt the quiet ache of being left behind. The bitter confrontation. John had been mulling over things for weeks, maybe even months. The distance between him and Ethan had grown unbearable, and every passing day felt like losing one more thread of the bond they once shared. But he never wanted to cause a scene. John wasn't the kind of man to demand attention or complain about being sidelined. He'd always been a quiet fighter, a man who bore burdens silently. Still, there was only so much silence one man could take. It started with Ethan missing Thanksgiving that year. "Sorry, Dad," Ethan had said over the phone a week before the holiday. Amanda and I are hosting a work event the same weekend. You know how it is." "Yeah, sure I do," John replied, masking his disappointment. "Work comes first, huh?" "It's not like that." Ethan's voice was strained. "We'll make it up to you, I promise. There's always Christmas." But John wasn't sure if he believed him anymore. The promises had become like leaves in the wind, momentarily visible, then gone before you could reach out to hold them. It wasn't Christmas that finally pushed John over the edge, though. It was a call from Amanda. "Hi, John," Amanda began one evening, her voice politely professional, like she was leaving a voicemail for a client instead of speaking to her father-in-law. "Ethan and I were talking, and we feel it might be best if you didn't come around as much. Not that we don't love seeing you," she quickly added, though her tone was as heartfelt as a cold email. "But Ethan's career is in a very delicate place right now. The image he's cultivating with clients and colleagues is, very important and, well, what?" John interrupted, his voice sharper than he intended. His heart was pounding. Amanda hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "What I mean is let's say your lifestyle doesn't really align with the circles Ethan's moving in now. It's just, appearances mean everything these days. I'm sure you understand." John's grip tightened on the phone. He felt his chest rise, his breath quickening. "Understand," he said, his voice gravelly. "What exactly am I supposed to understand, Amanda? That I'm not good enough to be around my own son anymore?" "It's not like that, John," Amanda replied quickly, though her tone revealed cracks in her carefully curated calm. "We're just trying to be mindful of—" "Oh, save it," John snapped, his frustration finally boiling over. "Don't talk to me about being mindful. Do you even hear yourself right now? I'm the one who worked my hands raw to get Ethan where he is. I cleaned floors and scrubbed toilets so he'd have a shot at the life you two are living so damn comfortably in now. And you're telling me I don't align with your lifestyle? John, please. Let me tell you something," John cut her off. "I don't care how many fancy dinners Ethan has to go to, or what kind of clients he wants to impress. He's still my boy, and I've still got every right to see him. If Ethan's too busy to call me himself and has to hide behind you to push me away, well, that's his problem. Not mine." There was a tense silence on the other end of the line. Amanda eventually muttered something vague and ended the call, but the damage was already done. John didn't plan on confronting Ethan directly. He wanted to let it go, let things cool down. But life has a cruel way of forcing moments like these. It was an ordinary Sunday when John decided to drop by Ethan's apartment. He hadn't been invited over in months, but he felt like he needed to look his son in the eyes, to figure out what the hell had happened to their relationship. When Ethan opened the door and saw John standing there, his expression was a mix of surprise and discomfort. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Ethan asked, glancing back nervously as if Amanda might overhear. "I came to talk," John said firmly, stepping inside before Ethan could stop him. "We need to have this out, once and for all." "Dad, if this is about Amanda—" Ethan began, but John cut him off with a raised hand. "No," he said. "This isn't about Amanda. This is about us. About the fact that I raised you to be better than this." He gestured around the high-rise apartment, the sleek furniture, the pretentious artwork on the walls. "Better than what?" Ethan shot back defensively. "Better than forgetting where you came from," John yelled, his voice raw with emotion. "I gave up everything for you, Ethan, everything. I gave you a life your mother and I only dreamed of having, and now you expect me to believe that you're too busy, too ashamed, to let your old man be a part of it?" Ethan rubbed his temples, clearly frustrated. "Dad, no one's ashamed of you, okay? That's not what this is about." "Then what is it about?" John asked, his voice quieter but no less intense. "Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell looks like you've decided I don't fit into the perfect little life you've built for yourself. You don't call, you don't visit, and now Amanda's telling me not to come around because I might screw up your image." Ethan winced, avoiding his father's gaze. "Look, Dad, there's a lot going on. My career—" "Your career?" John interrupted, shaking his head. "You keep saying that like it's some free pass to ignore the people who love you. I understand hard work, Ethan. I worked 3 jobs for 20 years so you wouldn't have to, but don't you dare stand there and tell me that work is more important than family. If your mother could see this, she'd—" "Don't bring Mom into this," Ethan snapped, his voice colder than John had ever heard it. John paused, staring at Ethan, really staring at him. For the first time, he didn't see his little boy anymore. He saw a man hardened by ambition, someone who had taken all the sacrifices made for him and used them as stepping stones to climb higher and higher, leaving everything else behind. "I don't even know who you are anymore," John said quietly. His voice wavered, but he meant every word. "But I'll tell you this. I'm done chasing after you. If you don't want me in your life, fine. You've made that pretty clear. But don't think for 1 second that I regret what I did for you. Every hour I worked, every dollar I saved, that was for you. And if I had to do it all over again, I'd do it in a heartbeat. Ethan looked away, guilt flickering across his face, but he said nothing. John sighed, his shoulders slumping. He had come here hoping for answers, for resolution, maybe even reconciliation. But all he found was a son he barely recognized. Without another word, John turned and walked out of the apartment. As the door clicked shut behind him, he felt a weight settle over his chest, heavier than anything he had ever carried. That night, as he sat alone in his small, dimly lit apartment, John stared at the photo of Emily on the mantel. "I tried, Em," he whispered, his voice breaking. "God knows I tried." A heartbreaking decision. John sat at the edge of his worn-out recliner, staring at the pile of bills that had accumulated on the small wooden table in front of him. The once neat and labeled manila folders had given way to an avalanche of unopened envelopes and overdue reminders. It wasn't just about the bills anymore, though. It wasn't even about the physical toll of working long hours that his aging body could barely endure. It was something deeper, a nagging realization that he had become a shadow in Ethan's life, a relic of a past that no longer aligned with his son's polished, ambitious world. He clenched his fists, the thick, callous skin of his palms pressing against his jeans. His apartment was dimly lit, the only source of light coming from the orange glow of the street lamp outside. The muffled sounds of his neighbors arguing floated through the thin walls, adding to the growing weight he felt pressing against his chest. "Emily, what do I do?" he said aloud, his voice low and cracked, as though speaking to the woman in the photo sitting atop his modest mantel. In the photograph, Emily was mid-laugh, her eyes squinting with that joyous way she had of embracing life fully. It brought a lump to his throat. "I don't think I can keep chasing him, not like this." By now it wasn't just about making peace with Ethan, it was about deciding where he belonged in the world and realizing that perhaps the answer wasn't waiting for Ethan to call or hoping for an invitation that might never come. John could feel the resonance of Emily in that tiny room. If she were alive, he was sure she'd make him see the right path, but now all he could do was guess what she might say. 2 weeks later, John made the decision. It wasn't impulsive or filled with drama, it was quiet, like most of the defining moments in his life. He flipped through the old manila folder where he had once kept every document about the house he had bought for Ethan and Emily years ago. The deed, the chocolate-stained receipts from renovation work, the loans he had taken. These papers had been his pride and his burden for decades. Now they felt like anchors, tangibly tied to a dream that had grown heavy with time. He placed the folder back neatly in its place. Tomorrow, he would contact a realtor to sell the property he no longer had any claim over in his heart. It wasn't just the income he needed, it was an act of letting go. The realtor's office was a quiet, impersonal place filled with the hum of printers and the click of keyboards. John sat in a chair across from a young agent who looked like he had barely crossed into his 20s. The kid was chewing gum and scanning the file John had brought with a token sense of concentration. "This house is on a prime lot, Mr. Kowalski," the young man said, smiling brightly. "In fact, with just a little restructuring—" "I'm not interested in restructuring," John interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "I just want it gone. No back and forth, no dragging it out. Sell it for whatever's fair." The realtor blinked, taken aback by John's bluntness. "You sure? I mean, this could fetch—" "Just do it," John said, standing up. "You've got what you need." By the end of that month, the house was sold, and John transferred the funds to a new savings account under the name Kowalski Community Foundation. It wasn't a large fortune, but it was enough to make a real impact on the struggling community center down the street from his apartment. They specialized in helping the homeless and kids who had slipped through the cracks, providing meals, education, and job training. Every name on the brochure reminded him of someone he might have worked beside in harder days, or worse, someone Ethan could have become if things hadn't gone right. The irony was not lost on him. "My boy's got his dream now," John muttered to himself as he handed the check over to the director of the center, a kindly middle-aged woman named Marcia. "Time I find a new purpose for mine." Marcia studied him for a moment, her gentle smile softening the harsh lines of her face. "John, I can see it already. Someone like you, you're going to change lives here. This generosity, it's just the start." John nodded, though her words barely registered. His heart felt heavy, but, in an odd way, lighter too. He had made peace with this decision without ceremony, and while it stung, of course it did, it felt right. A week later, John stepped into the small but bustling community center with 2 warm trays of lasagna in hand. He'd spent the night cooking, using Emily's old recipe for the first time in years. Kids were laughing and chasing each other around the main hall. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibilities. "Hey, John!" A wiry teenage boy with a mop of curly hair greeted him as John walked in. "You back for the kitchen shift?" John smiled. "Guess you're stuck with me around here now." He placed the trays down and rolled his sleeves up, ready to serve. The laughter of children echoed in the background, and the warmth of unspoken gratitude surrounded him. For the first time in years, John didn't feel like an afterthought. Here, among these people struggling to find their footing, he'd found a new tribe, a purpose. He sat on the steps outside the community center one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The faint hum of the city surrounded him, but in this moment, he felt an unfamiliar peace. The burden of pride, of expectations, of chasing after Ethan, had been traded for something simpler. He had traded his anger for compassion and his longing for belonging. And maybe, just maybe, Emily would have smiled at this decision too. A new life full of meaning. John had never imagined his life after Ethan would look like this. For years, his entire existence had been wrapped in the dream of helping his son succeed. He had thought that once Ethan made it, there would be a natural chapter of mutual support and companionship to follow. When that chapter didn't arrive, John was left standing on an empty stage, the spotlight shining dimly on the reality he now faced. But as with every hardship John had endured, he didn't sit in the dark for long. One evening, as John stood washing dishes in his cramped kitchen, he heard the muffled sound of crying. It came from the hall outside his apartment door. Drying his hands off on a threadbare towel, he opened the door to find a boy, no older than 16, slumped against the wall with his head in his hands. His clothes were tattered, his sneakers too small, and an old duct-taped backpack sat at his feet. "Hey there, kid," John said gently, crouching down to meet the boy's eye level. "You all right?" The boy flinched, startled by John's sudden presence, but he didn't run. Instead he looked up, his young face streaked with tears. "Yeah, sorry, mister," he mumbled, attempting to wipe his face on his sleeve. "Guess I was making too much noise." John studied him for a moment, his heart tightening. He didn't need to hear the boy's story to know it. He had seen it in the faces of so many others over the years, not just kids but adults too, people weighed down by burdens too heavy for their shoulders to carry. "Don't apologize," John said, his voice steady. "You hungry?" The boy froze, unsure how to respond. "I'm not asking to get in your business," John added, standing up and motioning back into his apartment. "But I've got leftovers, spaghetti, garlic bread, the whole deal, and I'd hate to see it go to waste. Why don't you come in for a bit?" For a long moment the boy hesitated, but something about John's tone, his calm, fatherly demeanor, put him at ease. He nodded slowly and followed John inside. Over dinner the boy introduced himself as Lucas. His story wasn't all that unique: abusive stepdad, an overwhelmed mom who couldn't intervene, and a recent argument that ended with Lucas being thrown out of the house. "They'll probably let me back in," Lucas said, picking at a piece of garlic bread and avoiding John's gaze. "But I don't know if I want to go back, you know? It's tough in there." John nodded, leaning back in his chair. "I hear you," he said. "Sometimes the places we come from don't know how to hold us right. But you've got to find somewhere. A community, a family, somewhere you can land on your feet. You can't fight the world on your own." Lucas glanced up at him, chewing thoughtfully. "You got a place like that?" John thought about it for a moment, his mind flashing back to the small community center on the edge of town. He had passed by it countless times but never paid much attention, until he donated the money from selling his house. From the very first day he'd walked through those doors, something had clicked. He had found a place where people weren't defined by their mistakes, their losses, or their scars. They were defined by the kindness they gave freely, and the hope they worked to build in others. "Yeah," John said with a soft smile, "I think I do, and you know what? I think it's time you met them." The next day John and Lucas walked into the bustling community center. It was a modest building, but alive with energy. Kids played in one corner, their laughter bouncing off the walls, while volunteers served soup and fresh bread to a long line of hungry faces in another. "Hey, John!" one of the volunteers, a wiry man named Pete, called from across the room. "Brought some company today?" "This here's Lucas," John said, patting the boy's shoulder. "He's gonna help out in the kitchen for a bit, aren't you, kid?" Lucas shot John a wide-eyed look but nodded. Yeah, sure, Pete grinned. Well, you're in for it now, Lucas. John's got this lasagna recipe that's basically a legend around here. You might want to take notes. For the first time, Lucas smiled, a small, hesitant thing, but genuine nonetheless. Weeks turned into months, and Lucas wasn't the only one who found a home at the center. John became a regular fixture there, his days filled with purpose. He cooked meals, played chess with the elderly visitors, and helped tutor kids after school hours. His favorite moments, though, were the quiet ones, showing a teenager how to patch a hole in their backpack, listening to a single mom vent about her struggles, or simply sitting with someone who needed a warm meal and a kind word. One night, after a long day working in the kitchen, John sat on the steps of the center, watching the sun set behind the downtown skyline. Marcia, the center's director, joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "You've made a big difference around here, you know," she said, taking a sip of her own. John shrugged, looking out at the horizon. "I'm just helping where I can." Marcia smiled. "That's the thing, John, where you see just helping. Other people see hope. Take Lucas, for example. That boy came in scared, unsure of himself. Now he's helping lead the after-school programs. He looks up to you, you know." John chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Look, I'm no saint, Marcia. I'm just trying to pay back all the kindness I've been lucky enough to see." "Well," Marcia said, setting her cup down, "just know that you've got a second family here, one that wouldn't be the same without you." As the weeks rolled on, John found himself filling a role he hadn't realized he needed. At the center, he wasn't just a volunteer. He was the guy people went to for advice, the steady presence others leaned on in times of chaos, and in giving so much of himself to others, he found something he hadn't felt in years: peace. One evening, as Lucas and a few of the other teenagers set up chairs for a community movie night, Lucas approached John, holding a weathered, handwritten thank you note. "What's this?" John asked, unfolding the paper. "It's like a thank you," Lucas mumbled, shoving his hands in his pockets. "For, everything. I don't think I would have gotten through these last few months without you." John's throat tightened as he read the note, the boy's handwriting messy but heartfelt. "You've got a good heart, Lucas," he said, folding the paper and placing it carefully in his pocket. "And don't think for 1 second that you wouldn't have made it. Sometimes all we need is a little push, a little faith. The rest is already in us." For the first time, John realized he wasn't just rebuilding himself, he was building others too, one small act of kindness at a time. As he sat on the fire escape of his small apartment later that night staring at the stars, John spoke softly into the night. You'd love this place," he murmured, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I think I finally found where I'm supposed to be." John had traded a life of chasing for a life of giving, and in the simplicity of that choice, he found a richness he hadn't known he was missing. Ethan faces hardship. Ethan had lived his life at full throttle for years. The elegant dinner parties, the meticulously tailored suits, the flashy Manhattan apartment, he had built it all. But as the sparkle of success shone brightly, the foundation holding it all together had begun to crack. Behind the polished exterior was a man juggling too many responsibilities and living far beyond his means. The first signs came quietly, like small ripples before a wave. "Ethan, we need to talk," Amanda said one morning as she stood in the kitchen of their high-rise apartment. She was still in her silk robe, her coffee cup perfectly matching the gold-accented decor surrounding her, but her tone was sharp, cutting through the soft hum of the city below. Ethan walked in, adjusting the cufflinks on his designer shirt. "Talk about what? If this is about last night's party I told you, Frank was being unreasonable. I did everything I could to smooth things over." He sighed, already annoyed. "It's not about Frank," she said firmly, her blue eyes narrowing. "It's about our finances." Ethan froze for a moment and then forced a laugh. "Our finances? Amanda, come on, I'm doing fine. The firm just approved my latest proposal. Bonuses are around the corner. What's the issue?" Amanda set her coffee down and crossed her arms. "The issue, Ethan, is that our credit cards are maxed out, the rent is 3 months overdue, and the landlord called me twice this week." Ethan's jaw tightened as he slipped into his usual suave composure. "It's just a rough patch. Everyone in this city goes through it. You don't get ahead in New York without taking a few risks. I'll fix it." Amanda's voice softened slightly, but her frustration was still clear. "Ethan, this rough patch has been going on for over a year, and you haven't fixed it. We're drowning in expenses, the dinners, the trips, the new car. It's too much, you're too much." That last part stung. Ethan straightened, adjusting his collar. "You knew what kind of life we wanted when we started this, Amanda. You knew what it would take to maintain it. Amanda shook her head, almost pityingly. I knew what you wanted. But I don't think this is sustainable, Ethan. Not for us. The conversation stuck with him, gnawing at the edges of his confidence as the weeks passed. No matter how much Ethan assured himself it was under control, the cracks became harder to ignore. The company was downsizing, and although Ethan wasn't directly impacted, the tension in the office was suffocating. Long-standing clients had begun tightening their budgets, making Ethan's commission-based salary feel more like quicksand. One Friday evening, Ethan sat in his downtown office long after everyone else had left, the glow of his computer screen the only light in the room. His reflection stared back at him, faint and ghostly against the window behind his desk. Somewhere deep down, he knew Amanda was right. It wasn't just a rough patch. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was losing control. It all came to a head 2 months later. Mr. Kowalski, the landlord, stood in the doorway of their apartment, his expression stern but not unkind. I've been patient, I really have, but 3 months behind is 3 months behind. If you can't pay by the end of the week— He hesitated, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. Look, I've got other tenants lined up. Ethan clenched his fists, keeping his face neutral through sheer force of will. You'll get your money. I just need a few more days. The landlord gave a short nod, though his expression said he had heard that line too many times before. All right, but no more extensions. Once the landlord was gone, Ethan slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Amanda wasn't home. She'd started staying with her sister more often, leaving him alone to face the mess he had created. Late that night, as Ethan shuffled through a pile of overdue bills, a thought struck him. His father had sold the family home years ago to help fund a community center. Ethan hadn't understood it then, and if he was being honest, he still didn't. But the house had been their nest egg, the one piece of stability that had been there since John and Emily had started their life together. Why would he give that up? Ethan muttered aloud, shaking his head. For the first time in a long time, Ethan thought about his father. Not the gruff, hard-working man who had raised him, but the quiet sacrifices John had made behind the scenes. Ethan had always brushed off his father's struggles as part of a different world, a life he had tried to escape. Now, staring at his own financial ruin, he wondered if he had made the wrong assumptions. The nagging thought wouldn't let go. Pulling out his phone, he hesitated for a moment before dialing the number he had memorized years ago but rarely used. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Come on, Dad, Ethan whispered, the anxiety rising in his chest, but no one answered. The days that followed only deepened Ethan's turmoil. Word traveled quickly at work that some of his accounts had been reassigned to newer team members, a clear sign the higher-ups were losing faith in him. At home, eviction was looming closer than ever. One evening, as Ethan stared out at the Manhattan skyline from his apartment window, he found himself wondering why none of it felt worth it anymore. His career, his reputation, even the city itself. It all felt hollow. Amanda had left earlier that day with most of her belongings, though she hadn't said the words outright. It was clear she wasn't coming back. Was everything I built just a damn facade? Ethan muttered to himself. That night, Ethan decided to take a walk. The cool autumn air bit at his face as he wandered aimlessly through the city streets. Without realizing it, he found himself standing in front of the community center his father had spoken about so fondly. Through the large windows, he could see kids playing in one corner of the room, their laughter faint but warm. At the back, a familiar figure moved between tables, serving bowls of soup to a line of people. Despite the dim light and the wrinkles that had deepened over the years, there was no mistaking John. Ethan stood frozen on the sidewalk, guilt pooling in his chest like lead. He had been barreling through his own life for so long, chasing status and ambition, that he had completely sidelined the man who had made it all possible. And now, after years of distance and silence, here was his father, finding purpose in a room full of strangers while Ethan stood empty-handed. Ethan's throat tightened as he stepped closer to the door. He wasn't sure what he would say, or if the words would even come out. For the first time in years, Ethan felt small, not because of anyone else, but because of the weight of his own actions. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. The warmth of the room washed over him, and before he could second-guess himself, Ethan called out softly, "Dad?" Regret and reconciliation. Ethan stood in the doorway of the bustling community center, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't called ahead, hadn't prepared for this moment. For years he had built a wall between himself and the man who had given everything for him. Now, Under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights and with the faint smell of soup in the air, he realized just how much he had lost. Across the room, John moved among a line of people waiting for their meals, serving soup with practiced ease. His movements were deliberate, steady, and confident, but his face was older and more lined than Ethan remembered. He looked tired, but there was a warmth in his demeanor that Ethan hadn't seen in years. Something honest, something authentic. "Dad?" Ethan's voice came out shakier than he intended. John turned, ladle still in hand. When his eyes landed on Ethan, his movements froze for just a moment. There was surprise there, maybe even disbelief, but it was quickly masked by his usual calm. Setting the ladle down, John stepped away from the serving line, wiping his hands on his apron as he approached his son. "Ethan," John said simply, his voice low but steady. Ethan tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. It felt like every ounce of guilt and regret he had buried over the years was bubbling to the surface. "Dad, he started, but the weight of his emotions silenced him again. John studied him for a moment, his face unreadable. Then, with a small sigh, he nodded toward a quieter corner of the room. "Let's talk," he said gently. They sat at one of the old folding tables near the back of the center, far enough away from the chatter and laughter of volunteers and visitors. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in the metal chair, his expensive jacket feeling out of place in the modest surroundings. "I wasn't sure if I should come," Ethan admitted, staring down at his hands. "I mean, after everything." John leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "After everything?" he repeated, his tone calm but tinged with curiosity. Ethan looked up then, meeting his father's gaze for the first time. The words poured out of him like a flood. "After the way I've treated you. After pushing you out of my life, pretending like I didn't need you anymore. I didn't call, I didn't visit, and when I did, I treated you like you were an afterthought." He shook his head, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm so ashamed, Dad." John was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed softly. "I won't lie to you, Ethan," he said. "It hurt. Watching you drift away, pretending like I didn't exist, like the years we spent building your future didn't mean a damn thing. Yeah, that hurt." The words hit Ethan like a punch, but he didn't interrupt. He deserved this. "But you know what hurt even more?" John continued, his voice dropping lower. "Knowing that I'd taught you better than that, or at least, I thought I had." "Dad, you did teach me better," Ethan said quickly, his voice desperate. I got caught up in everything. The job, the money, the reputation, it all felt so important at the time. I thought I was doing it for us, for the dream you and Mom always talked about. I didn't realize I was losing the things that actually mattered." John nodded slowly, his eyes softening a fraction. "The dream, huh?" he said almost to himself. "Your mom and we dreamed of a lot of things for you, Ethan. We dreamed about you being happy, being kind, being the kind of man who knows the difference between what matters and what doesn't. All that other stuff, the money, the reputation, that was never the point." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "I know, Dad, I see that now. But it took losing almost everything to realize it." John raised an eyebrow. "Losing everything?" Ethan let out a humorless laugh, running a hand through his hair. "Amanda left me. The apartment's about to be gone. Work's hanging by a thread. I spent so many years chasing this perfect life, and now I'm sitting here wondering if it was ever real to begin with." John's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of some emotion, sympathy maybe, in his eyes. "That's a hard place to be," he said quietly. Ethan nodded. "It is, and honestly I don't know how to fix it, but the one thing I kept thinking over and over was how much I wished I could call you. How much I wished I hadn't let things get so bad between us. That's why I'm here, Dad. I can't change what I've done, but I want to do better. I want to be better. And I want you to be part of my life again." John didn't respond right away. He sat there, studying his son with the quiet intensity that had always intimidated Ethan as a boy. But this time there was no judgment in his gaze, just a deep, quiet understanding. "You know," John said finally, his voice soft but steady, "I never stopped being in your corner, Ethan, even when you stopped calling, stopped visiting, even when Amanda told me I didn't fit into your big fancy world. I never stopped rooting for you." Ethan felt his throat tighten, tears threatening to spill. "I don't deserve that, Dad." John reached across the table, resting a rough calloused hand on top of Ethan's. "It's not about what you deserve, kid. It's about family. And no matter how far you drift, no matter how many times you screw up, you're still my son. You'll always be my son." Ethan's composure finally broke. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of years of regret spilling out in quiet sobs. John didn't say anything, didn't try to fill the silence. He just sat there, his hand steady on Ethan's, giving him the space to feel everything he needed to feel. When Ethan finally looked up, his face was red and tear-streaked, but there was a calm in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Thank you, Dad," he said quietly, "for everything, for giving me a second chance." John smiled faintly, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "You don't get just one second chance in life, son. You get as many as you need." Ethan nodded, a small, hopeful smile tugging at his lips. "I want to help, Dad," he said after a pause. "Here at the center. I don't know much about community work, but I want to try. I want to do something that actually matters for once." John's smile widened, and for the first time in years, it reached his eyes. "We could always use more hands around here," he said. "Just be ready to roll up your sleeves. No fancy suits allowed." Ethan chuckled softly. "I think I can handle that." As the night wore on, the two of them sat at the table, talking and reminiscing like they hadn't in years. The chatter and laughter of the community center buzzed around them, but for John and Ethan, the room might as well have been empty. For the first time in a long time, they weren't just father and son, they were family again, and for John, that was enough. Healing in silence. Ethan's commitment to reconnect with his father started slowly, almost cautiously, like testing uncertain waters. He wasn't sure if John truly believed his intentions, and truthfully, Ethan wasn't entirely sure he could trust himself not to repeat his past mistakes. The wounds he had inflicted, years of neglect and self-centeredness, felt almost impossible to repair. But the quiet, unspoken determination in John's steady presence gave Ethan something tangible to hold on to. Their journey toward reconciliation wasn't marked by dramatic proclamations or tearful apologies. It was, instead, built moment by moment, hardship by hardship, as both men learned to exist in the same space again, not as the father and son they used to be, but as the people they had become. It started with Ethan showing up at the community center nearly every evening after work, or what work was left after he finally quit his imploding corporate job. "Need a hand with this?" Ethan asked one night, gesturing to a large tray of bread John was taking out of the industrial oven in the center's kitchen. John glanced over his shoulder, sweat glistening on his forehead as the warmth of the oven filled the room. "Sure, but careful, it's hot." Ethan grabbed a spare dish towel and used it to grip the edges of the tray. "I think I'll survive." He set the bread down on the counter and glanced toward the pots simmering on the stove. "What's this tonight, lasagna?" "You think I'd let anyone else cook my lasagna?" John quipped, his lips twitching into the faintest smile. Ethan chuckled and leaned against the counter. "Tastes like how Mom used to make it." He didn't miss the way John's shoulders tensed slightly at the mention of Emily, but he also saw how his father's expression softened. "It's her recipe," John said after a pause. "I've been tweaking it over the years, adding my own little touches." Ethan nodded, his gaze dropping to the worn, scratched counter beneath his fingers. He wanted to say more, to tell John how every bite of that lasagna reminded him of the nights they sat as a family at the old kitchen table, laughing and talking about their day. But the words felt caught behind some invisible wall. Instead, he said quietly, "I miss her." John didn't respond right away. He stirred the pot on the stove, his back to Ethan, but his movements slowed. "I do too," he finally murmured. "Every day." The air between them thickened with shared grief, but neither man pushed the silence away. It was the kind of weight they both believed they had to carry alone, until that moment reminded them they didn't have to. As weeks went by, Ethan began finding small ways to contribute at the center, slowly earning the trust of the regulars and volunteers. One afternoon he arrived early to help Marcia, the center's director, set up for an after-school program. Rows of folding tables had already been arranged in the main hall, and colorful craft supplies were scattered on every surface. "You're John's son, huh?" a teenage girl named Mia said as she stacked cups of paint near the edge of the table. Ethan tilted his head, surprised by the observation. "How'd you know?" Mia smirked. "You've got the same eyebrows, and the way you talk. It's weird, though, he's never mentioned you before." Ethan blinked, startled by the honesty of her words. "Well, I haven't been around as much as I should have," he admitted quietly. Mia raised an eyebrow. "Weird. Your dad's always talking about helping people, sticking by family. Guess I thought you'd be, like, super close or something." Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but found no words to defend himself. He simply nodded and continued unpacking supplies. Later that night, as the kids filed out of the center and the staff began cleaning up, Ethan stayed behind, folding chairs and helping John sweep the room. "You didn't have to hang back," John said as he dumped a dustpan full of crumbs and glitter into the trash. "I wanted to," Ethan replied, stacking another chair in the corner. He hesitated a moment before asking, "Do you talk about me here?" John stopped sweeping and leaned on the broom handle, his eyes narrowing slightly in thought. "Not much," he admitted. "Folks don't ask, and it's not exactly a bedtime story worth telling." Ethan winced, nodding in understanding. "Fair enough. But," John continued, his tone softening, "I do think about you. Every time I see a dad and son come in here struggling, trying to make it right, trying to figure life out together, it makes me wonder if maybe I could have done something different." Ethan looked at his father, his chest tightening at the vulnerability in his words. "Dad, it wasn't you. It was me," he said firmly. "I was selfish. I thought I knew everything, and I thought I didn't need you anymore. I was wrong, and now, I just want to make up for lost time if you'll let me." John studied Ethan for a long moment, then gave a subtle nod. It's never too late to start over. Their routine became a quiet kind of therapy for both of them. They didn't have sweeping, emotional conversations every night. There were no cinematic revelations or perfect answers. Instead, they shared moments the way they used to when Ethan was a boy, over things like organizing shelves, choosing music for the center's fundraisers, or just sitting on the fire escape of John's apartment as the city skyline twinkled in the distance. "I know I'll never be able to make everything right," Ethan said one night, his voice low and steady as he leaned against the faded metal railing. John, nursing a cup of coffee beside him, glanced over. "Making everything right isn't the goal," he said simply. "The goal is to keep trying." Ethan let the words settle in his mind, their simple wisdom grounding him. "I want to keep trying, Dad. Not just here, not just now. For us. For good." John gave him a small smile, the one that carried a touch of wry humor and a whole lot of heart. "You know, I think you mean that this time," he said. Ethan chuckled. "Yeah, I think I do too." Over time, the gap that had once felt impossible to cross began to shrink. John and Ethan learned to speak in the quiet language of trust rebuilt, not by words alone but by actions and time. From volunteering together to attending weekend grocery runs, they began carving out a new version of their relationship. It wasn't perfect. It didn't erase the years they had lost. But it was something real, something precious. And in the silent moments, when neither of them spoke but both of them knew the other was there, they found a kind of healing they didn't even know they needed. A peaceful conclusion. John had always believed that life didn't owe him anything, not joy, not fairness, not even redemption. And yet, as he sat on the fire escape of his small apartment one cool spring evening, staring at the stars that dotted New Jersey's skyline, he felt a sense of peace he couldn't quite explain. Over the years he had learned to let go of what he couldn't fix, embrace what he could, and cherish the unexpected blessings that life sometimes delivered. It had been a long journey, full of heartbreak, sacrifice, and the slow, quiet task of mending bridges, but as he sipped black coffee from his chipped mug and listened to the distant hum of the city, John realized he wasn't carrying the same weight anymore. For the first time in decades, the world felt lighter. Ethan knocked on John's apartment door later that night. It was a sound John had grown used to hearing in recent months, a knock that was patient, almost apologetic, like Ethan was still unsure if he would be welcomed. "Door's open!" John called from the kitchen where he stood over a pot of chili simmering on the stove. The smell of cumin and garlic wafted through the tiny room. Ethan stepped inside, glancing around the modest apartment. It still held that same rustic charm he remembered from childhood, the small dining table, the knockoff art prints on the walls, the old recliner in the corner that no one dared to suggest John replace. "You're cooking again," Ethan said with a small smile, shrugging off his coat and tossing it over a chair. John stirred the pot and looked over his shoulder. "Gotta eat, don't I? Besides, someone's gotta keep this place smelling like home." Ethan chuckled and walked over to the kitchen counter. "Smells good. You still use Mom's recipe for this?" "The one and only," John replied with a faint grin. "Some things don't need to change." They fell into an easy rhythm, with Ethan taking bowls down from the cupboard and setting the table while John ladled out portions of chili. It was simple, ordinary, but that was its beauty. For years, they had drifted apart in the pursuit of extraordinary lives. Now they found comfort in the small, quiet routines they shared. "Dad," Ethan said after a while, breaking the silence as they ate, "I've been thinking about something lately, about you, about us." John leaned back in his chair, resting his hands on his stomach. "Yeah? What's on your mind?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, his spoon hovering over his bowl. You've lived your whole life giving to other people. I mean, everything you've ever done was for me, for Mom, for the family. Even now, with the center, you're still giving. Don't you ever think about, I don't know, taking something for yourself?" John's lips twitched into a soft smile, but his eyes stayed thoughtful. "I don't think I ever looked at it that way," he said. "Giving isn't something that takes away from me. It's the opposite, really. It's what keeps me going, makes me feel alive. You don't give because you owe something. You give because it's the right thing to do." Ethan nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. He had spent so many years chasing things, money, respect, power, only to realize that none of it mattered if you didn't have someone to share it with. His father had been trying to teach him that his whole life, and it had taken him far too long to understand. "Well," Ethan said after a pause, his tone lighter, "it makes you sound like some kind of modern-day saint." John laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Saint? Nah, I'm just an old man who's too stubborn to quit." As the months passed, John and Ethan's relationship evolved into something neither of them had expected. It wasn't perfect, but it didn't have to be. It was real, built on the foundation of forgiveness and the understanding that love didn't need to be loud or showy, it just needed to be there. Ethan found purpose at the community center, working alongside his father to help those who had been dealt a tough hand in life. The work wasn't glamorous. It meant scrubbing floors, organizing donations, and sitting through endless rounds of paperwork, but it was real, and it mattered. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like he was part of something bigger than himself. One day, as Ethan helped a young boy with a math problem in the after-school program, John watched from the doorway. There was something in Ethan's posture, in the way he leaned down to meet the boy's gaze, that reminded John of Emily. It was in the kindness of his eyes, the gentle patience in his voice. John smiled to himself, leaning against the doorframe. "We did all right, Em," he murmured under his breath. "He's finally getting it." On Sundays, they started a new tradition, hiking together on the trails just outside the city. John would pack sandwiches and thermoses of coffee, and Ethan would bring his camera. They'd walk for hours, the silence between them companionable and full of unspoken gratitude. One sunny morning, as they stood at the edge of a rocky overlook, Ethan snapped a picture of his father staring out at the distant horizon. The way the light caught John's profile made him look younger, almost like the man Ethan remembered from his childhood. "Think this one'll look good framed," Ethan said, lowering the camera. John smirked. "Just make sure you use the cheap frames. Don't go wasting your money." Ethan rolled his eyes but couldn't help smiling. "Fine. Dollar store it is." Life didn't slow down, and the world didn't stop throwing challenges their way. But John had always believed that peace wasn't about avoiding hardship. It was about learning to live fully despite it. One evening, as John sat on his fire escape with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders and a cup of tea in his hands, Ethan joined him. The stars were out, faint but steady against the city's glow. "You ever think about what's next?" Ethan asked, breaking the comfortable silence. John tilted his head. "Next in what sense? Dinner tomorrow or the big picture?" Ethan chuckled. "The big picture, I don't know. Retirement, travel, skydiving maybe?" John raised an eyebrow. "Skydiving? You trying to kill me off early?" They both laughed, the sound cutting through the night air. "I don't know," John said after a moment, smiling softly. "I think I'm right where I'm supposed to be. What about you?" Ethan leaned back, his hands resting on the cool metal of the fire escape. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think I'm finally getting there." For the first time in years, there was no tension between them, no lingering regrets or unspoken misunderstandings. Just two men, father and son, sitting side by side under the stars. And so, life continued, not perfect, not easy, but full of meaning in the way that only hard-won moments of peace can be. John and Ethan had found their way back to each other, and that was enough. When John eventually closed his eyes that night, his heart was full. Whatever the future held, he knew he wouldn't face it alone, and that to him was the greatest peace of all.